Earlier this weekend, Eric and I were out for a walk in our neighborhood when we came across the first garage sale of the season. And as we were walking by, I turned to Eric and said, "Did you know DMPC has the most amazing treasure sale? Each year, our mission committee puts on this incredible church treasure sale to raise money for our mission budgets." Well, apparently, those are fighting words in our house, because Eric's church also has a pretty impressive church sale. And so while we were heatedly discussing about whose church rummage sale was better, we also found ourselves laughing and thinking about how much rummage sales have become important in church life. And so as we were joking about this and having a good time on our walk, I started actually thinking about something that preacher and teacher Phyllis Tickle talks about. She has this thesis that has to do with churches and rummage sales. She believes that every 500 years or so, the church undergoes a major change or a rummage sale, where it figures out what it wants to keep and what it wants to get rid of. And so Tickle looks back over the seasons of Christendom and notes these changes or rummage sales in the church. She references events such as the creation of the first great libraries to save and preserve Christian documents. She also looks at the great schism that caused the division between the Eastern and the Western churches. And of course, she includes what we know of as today as the Reformation. So she asserts that every 500 years, Christianity and the church enters into a new season. And she believes that we might very well be in the midst of one right now. Christianity is not only going through a global pandemic, but we have also been going through a religious rummage sale. And just like having a garage sale, just how that's not for the faint of heart, moving into a new season of Christianity isn't either. And yet, again and again, we are reformed. Our gospel text this morning talks about how hard change can be. Our story picks up right after Jesus' triumphal entry into Jerusalem, or as some scholars call it, Jesus' protest march into Jerusalem. And this conversation that follows it is the final public discourse of Jesus' ministry. It's here where he looks back over his life and also moves everyone ahead, helping them to focus on the coming days. It's here where he predicts his death for the third and final time, as the events leading to the cross have already been set in motion. And he opens this conversation to both Jews and Greeks, and he begins it with a metaphor about this piece of grain. Jesus says, "Very truly I tell you, unless a grain of wheat falls into the earth and dies, it remains just a single grain. But if it dies, it bears much fruit." Through this verse, it is as if Jesus is saying that change means death. Even healthy and good change means death. In fact, in order to grow and to sprout and to bear fruit, the seed has to die. And yet at the same time, Jesus is not only inviting listeners to examine their experience of change in their own hearts and lives, but he is preparing them for the change that is yet to come. Friends, this is the preamble to the story of Jesus' resurrection. The earth-shattering change that the community will experience both at the cross on Good Friday and on Sunday morning at the tomb. And after Jesus announces this preamble on the change that will happen and that we will all experience, he shifts our focus as he prepares us for what is already happening and what is to come. And it happens when there is suddenly a booming voice from the heavens that announces, I have glorified it and I will glorify it again. This holy announcement is not only a reminder of what God has done, right? I have glorified, but it is also what God is doing and what God will continue to do. I will glorify again. This is important, friends, because it's a reminder that God is still at work. We can look back to the past and remember what God has done, but it is also a reminder that God is in the here and now, that God is still at work, present in the midst of our changing, in the hearts of our dying and our rising. God has glorified and God will continue to glorify again and again. The hope is that we will be brave enough and daring enough to ask ourselves the questions. What are we willing to change? How are we willing to die so that we might rise to new life? How will we change? Again and again, we are reformed. If you have visited the church building of DMPC in the last year, you will notice that our fellowship hall is stocked and ready for next year's treasure sale. One day, post-pandemic, we will have an incredibly prolific treasure sale. And so each time I'm in that fellowship hall, I wander around looking at all of these items and thinking about where they came from and where they might be headed, how they were loved and used, why they were given away, and how they might be recycled into something new. And as I looked around the hall and at all these items, I began to think about how it speaks so deeply to this moment that we are in as a church. As we examine who we are right now, what we want to keep, who we want to be as we move forward. It reminded me of how a few weeks ago we as a congregation voted to keep our buildings, that God was calling us to continue to be here in this neighborhood, to serve and love on God's people. And we knew going into that vote, whatever decision we made, we knew both choices meant we will be experiencing change. We will have to continue to rethink the ways that we connect with our community. We will have to seek out and welcome new partners in that ministry. And we will have to be creative in how we seek to grow and thrive as a congregation. Much like our treasure sale, we are in the middle of a metaphorical rummage sale. We are entering into a new season of our faith community. And it is both exciting and scary. Our text this morning is a pastoral reminder that change is hard. Doing church in a new way is hard because it means grieving what we live behind. This idea that change means death means that we have to grieve what we are losing, that we have to grieve the way things were so that we can move into the way things are and the way things will be. And I have to tell you, friends, we have had to do so much grieving this year, both of loved ones and our families, and also of this way of life before the pandemic. And yet, as we grieve and remember what we've lost, we have also discovered new things. We have discovered new ways of being together. We have welcomed people from across the globe to gather with us on Zoom and worship at Bible studies. And we have learned new ways to worship and celebrate the gifts of those in our communities, from artwork to music. And we have even learned lots of different kinds of recipes for communion, from goldfish and prune juice to hamburger buns and cold coffee. Again and again, we have found the sacred in the ordinary, and the holy in the midst of the chaos. We have found love in the pain and growth in the change. Our text also reminds us, friends, that all of this work, all of this change, all of this growth, all of this grief is not work we do on our own. Time and time again, God is still at work in the midst of that change. Again and again, we are reformed. Again and again, we are not alone. Now, Phyllis Tickle also teaches that in the midst of every rummage sale, people are worried and anxious about if the church is going to survive. I don't know about you, but that sounds pretty familiar to me. She notes that people are asking hard questions and wrestling with the fear and worry and grief about the future of the church. And then she continues by saying, however, by the grace of God, the church always comes out of these rummage sales more faithful and stronger than before. It's pretty amazing, right? Those are words of hope. And yet, beloveds, the truth is, as much as I want to hang on to Phyllis's words and believe that the same thing will happen today, the only thing I can say with certainty is that I don't know what the future holds or how the current Christian rummage sale will shake out, both in the world and the rummage sale happening in our own congregation here. However, what I do know is that God is faithful, and that God is good, and that God is working for the goodness and fullness and justice, and that we do not experience change, reformation, or transformation on our own. As we clean out the cobwebs and discern how God is calling us to be faithful disciples as a community of faith, we do so trusting God's goodness and love. So trusting in this goodness and love that is never ending, I ask DMPC, in what ways will we be willing to change? Where are the places in our community that we need to reckon with? What are the things that we need to grieve so that we can move forward? And where are the places of holy imagination where we can catch glimpses of God's dream for the world and for ourselves? Friends, this journey, this rummage sale, this change will not be easy. However, so many have gone through this wilderness before us. We are in good company, and we can do this. We can navigate our way through this while holding on to one another and walking this way with God's help, one step at a time. Now, I say this cautiously because I fully realize that this is easier said than done. And beloveds, I don't have any wise words on how to keep on. However, I do find comfort in songs. And when it's hard for me to remember that God is in the midst of this change with me, I find myself humming the words to this song. The words are by Archbishop Desmond Tutu, and they go like this. Goodness is stronger than evil. Love is stronger than hate. Light is stronger than darkness. Life is stronger than death. Victory is ours, victory is ours, through God who loves us. Victory is ours, victory is ours, through God who loves us. Beloveds, These are words for us to hold as we go through this rummage sale together. These are words that meet our hearts in tender places and helps prepare us for what's to come. And they do so like a booming voice from the heavens. They remind us that though the road is long, change is necessary in order to be transformed, and that God is always with us and for us, and is working for good, fullness, justice, and love. And at the same time, God is inviting us into this song through the changing and transformation and emboldening of our hearts. May we be tender enough to listen, open enough to take the first step, and brave enough to ask questions, while being bold enough to remember that we do not experience this alone. That God is in the midst of the changing, in the midst of the dying and the rising, always lifting us forward towards new life. We are reformed again and again. Beloveds, this is good news. Thanks be to God.